This lesson is over sexual morality, and there's a lot of issues that are mentioned here, and there's a lot of issues related to sexual morality, and maybe this is the kind of area where it's a litmus test to see how liberal or conservative you are politically, how you might answer some of these questions. But some things that, in previous generations were issues of sexual morality now no longer are considered to be that important. And perhaps some new issues have arisen, although probably not that many. Now, at the beginning of the chapter, there's a lot of issues that are discussed, and I'm just touching on a few of these, and just so we get a kind of a flavor of what kind of things can be talked about. Now, the idea of casual sex, I put it in quotes here, is because it's the idea that legitimate sex takes place in a marriage, which for a lot of people may be an old-fashioned idea in contemporary United States society. Although in some parts of the world and in some sections of this country, in some households, it's not such a radical idea. But the idea of casual sex is any sex that takes place outside of a marriage, and for some people that's an important ethical issue. And for others, it's not that important issue as long as we're dealing with consenting adults who aren't being coerced in any way. And there's issues of sexually transmitted diseases, which are issues of fact and are certainly related to sexual behavior because that's how they're transmitted. There's issues of unwanted pregnancy, and again, this could be the result of casual sex or could also take place within a marriage. There are gender issues related to sex and discrimination and things like that, and what we call double standards in terms of gender, where certain attitudes are prevalent that towards women different than they are towards men, and we mentioned some of that in previous lesson. And there's issues to do with sex work, for example, pornography, prostitution, erotic dancing, or stripping. Those are all forms of sex work. And of course, there's related things that are related to sex work as far as the support industry, not just the sex worker, the person who is performing the sexual activity, but people who profit from that is also part of the sex work industry. And that related to that is the idea of sex trafficking, in which people are coerced into performing sex work through various means, either through some form of slavery or through some other form of coercion. Of course, not all sex workers are coerced, but many of them are. So this is an important issue. And finally, homosexuality, and this is covered at the end of the chapter, and there's a longer section discussing same-sex marriage, which I'm not going to get into in this lecture, but certainly it's part of your reading assignment. And it has been a controversial issue lately. Of course, same-sex marriage is now legal everywhere in the United States because of a ruling by the Supreme Court a few years ago. And however, it still is a controversial issue for a lot of people, homosexual behavior as well as homosexual marriage. But it's still illegal in many parts of the world. In some places in the world, you can get the death penalty for being convicted of engaging in homosexual behavior. So these are a list of many issues that can come up related to sexual morality, and certainly in your reading and thinking about this, many of these may come to your mind, and you may decide what you think one way or the other. Of course, an issue that arises, and this is discussed, is that what is sexual? What counts as sexual behavior? And that is going to be a matter of interpretation, a matter of concepts. What you take to be sexual and someone else may not take to be sexual. It's like that. There's no joke about the difference between pornography and erotica, and that erotica is what I find sexy and pornography is what you find sexy. Again, that's an old joke. And then there are also factual matters like having to do with sexually transmitted diseases, having to do with psychological effects of certain kinds of sexual behavior on people, trauma perhaps from certain kinds of sexual behavior. So these are factual matters discussed quite well in the text. Now, if we're going to try to convince someone of our position on sexual morality, like maybe we agree with some of these things and we don't, many of these are not controversial in terms of most people will agree that they're wrong, although many of these things there's going to be difference of opinion in the class. And as we've known so far, we apply ethical theory, these different ethical views, perspectives, to try to make a case one way or the other for a particular judgment. So there, as always, there are utilitarian considerations. We can ask, well, does this practice of sexuality promote the common good or does it not? So should we allow it or should we not allow it? Or from more individual perspective, should I do this? Will this promote the common good if I engage in this behavior, or will it not? So we talked a little bit about the difference between utilitarianism as a way to judge individual actions versus a way to judge policies. So we may ask about something like prostitution. Well, would it promote the common good to decriminalize prostitution, or would it not? Should it be regulated in some way, as it is, say, in Nevada in the United States? Would that be a way to promote the common good better than having it as a criminal behavior? And there are non-consequentialist considerations having to do with respect for others, as well as the question of universalizable laws. We also think in terms of libertarian views, the idea that you have the right to do with your body what you wish, as long as you don't violate other people's right to do with their body what they wish. A lot of people base their views on sexuality in terms of the ethics on a libertarian kind of view, which is a deontological view. It's not necessarily a Kantian view, but it is a deontological, duty-based ethical theory. And finally, in these discussions of sexuality, natural law considerations are often brought up because an argument has been made that the natural purpose of sex is reproduction, and people who follow a conservative version of natural law go so far as to say, well, it has to be reproduction within a marital context where the people stay together and raise the children to create virtuous members of society, right? And so then the idea is that any kind of sexual behavior that deviates from that is a violation of natural law. You could even go so far as to say, well, it's unnatural in some way, and so therefore it should be forbidden and people should refrain from doing it. So these are just some of the ethical considerations that can come up when talking about sexuality, and you should be able to understand and use these in your arguments, whether you're for or against something. At least to understand the other argument, if you disagree with it, at least try to understand what they're saying so that you can critique their argument and at least come to a better understanding. So that concludes this rather brief video lecture on sexual morality.